The BRATV'S RUINPART2, the ghost behind the glass asterisk, the most dangerous thing a man like Nikolai Sokolov can do is let someone matter. The second most dangerous thing is letting them know it. 1. The conversation in the dark sat in her chair. Not deliberately, she understood that. He had come through the door and seen her face and the photograph in her hand, and crossed the room with the particular controlled urgency of a man managing an emergency, and the chair had simply been the nearest surface. But it was the chair she had chosen. The one she had dragged 3 inches to the left on her second day, because the angle to the window was better. The one she had claimed by the specific geometry of her reading habits, and now Nikolai Sokolov was in it and looking at the note on the back of the photograph, and his face was doing things she had not prepared herself to see. She sat on the edge of the bed, across from him, close enough that the space between them had weight. Outside, the house moved. She could hear Mikkel's voice, low and efficient, in the corridor. Heavy footsteps on the stairs going up, going down. The particular quality of a building being systematically checked by people who understood what they were looking for. Nikolai set the photograph face down on the arm of the chair. Cabinet, he said, contained files. What kind of files? Documentation. A pause, precise and deliberate like everything else about him. My personal documentation of the surveillance operation, not operational, personal. Another pause. Photographs, notes, timelines. She absorbed this. A 4-year archive. Of me. Yes, she looked at the window. The snow had thickened again outside, the city reduced to a glow beyond the dark tree line. And someone opened that cabinet and went through those files. Apparently. Someone in this house. He said nothing for a moment. She was learning the gradations of his silences, the ones that were processing, the ones that were managing, the ones that were close to something he didn't want to be close to. This one was the last kind. Cabinet requires a physical key, he said finally. I have one. Andrei has one, my head of security. There is a 3rd key in the house safe. He stopped. I had the safe opened an hour ago. The 3rd key is gone. She looked back at him. Someone stole a key from your safe, she said. Someone who knew it was there. Someone who knew what the cabinet contained. His jaw was tight, not with the controlled tightness she'd seen before, with something rower than that. Someone who specifically wanted you to find those files, who knew you'd been in that corridor, who knew your patterns well enough to time it. Vadim Merk. Merk doesn't have people here. Or, he stopped. The correction hung in the air. Or I believed he didn't. She studied his face. The fire had burned lower while they'd been talking, and the room was running on lamplight now, amber and close, and in it his expression was stripped of some of its usual architecture. She could see the thing beneath, not emotion in the soft sense, but something structural. Damage, old damage and new. Nikolai, she said. He looked at her. Tell me everything, she said again, because she had asked this downstairs and he had followed her up here and sat in her chair but had not yet actually begun. Not about the cabinet or the key or Merk, the full picture, all of it. The thing you've been managing since before I arrived. Silence this time was different. The kind that happens when a person who has been carrying something alone for a long time stands at the edge of setting it down and is not yet sure the ground beneath them will hold. Merk has been positioning for 2 years, he said at last. He began with the Southern Supply routes, testing boundaries. Incremental. The kind of pressure that could be explained away, attributed to market shifts rather than intent. I recognized it for what it was approximately 8 months ago. When you had the photograph of my office taken, a pause. Yes, you thought he might use me. I thought. He stopped, chose again. I thought that if Merk was planning a serious move against the organization, he would eventually identify pressure points. I thought that given the nature of my interest in you, he might eventually learn of it and attempt to leverage it. He looked at her steadily. I thought this before the debt situation presented itself. It was one of the reasons I moved when the opportunity came. She was quiet for a moment, turning this over with care. You brought me here partly to protect me. I brought you here for reasons that are not entirely separable. He said it with a precision that felt effortful, like a man translating from a language that has no direct equivalent in the one he's speaking. The protection is not separate from the wanting. I have not been able to make them separate. Room held that. She looked at him, really looked, in the way she had been doing for 3 weeks in fragments and glimpses, the accumulated portrait of a man who had structured his entire existence around legibility, except in the single area where he couldn't manage it. And she thought about the cabinet, and the files, and the 4 years of wanting something he couldn't stop wanting, organized into folders. She thought about how it must look from the outside. She thought about how it looked from where she was sitting. "Who is the traitor?" she asked. He blinked, fractionally. The question had moved the conversation and he'd followed it, she noted, let her lead without resistance. "I don't know yet. I have 4 candidates." He paused. "I will know by morning." How? Something moved across his face. "By methods I would prefer not to describe to you. Violence. The threat of it, possibly the application." He looked at her without apology. "I told you who I am. You told me you use violence precisely." She met his gaze. "Is this precise?" He considered this seriously. Not defensively, she was beginning to understand that he didn't do defensive, not in the personal sense. He simply assessed. "Yes," he said. "There are 4 people in this household who had access to the information about the safe. One of them chose to act on it tonight in a way that was designed to reach you. That choice was deliberate, targeted, and intended to destabilize." A pause. "Destabilizing my household while a rival is positioning for a move is not a coincidence. I need to know which one it is before morning because whatever Merk is planning, the timetable just accelerated." Sofia looked at the upside-down photograph on the arm of her chair, at the 7 words on the back that she could reconstruct without seeing them. "He can't protect you from what's already inside." "They wanted me to be afraid," she said. "Yes, to run, or to lose trust in me." He held her gaze. "If you panic or leave, I am destabilized without Merk having to do anything further. And if you stay but don't trust me," he stopped. "If I stay but don't trust you," she said slowly, "then I'm useful to them instead of to you." Something shifted in his expression. The recognition of being understood arriving the way it always arrived in his face, with that fractional compression, that thing that was almost warmth before the lid closed over it. "Yes," he said. She stood up, went to the window, looked out at the snow and the dark trees and the perimeter lights of a property that was supposed to be impenetrable. "Not going anywhere," she said. Behind her, the silence had a texture. "Sofia, not going anywhere." She turned back. Her voice was level. Her hands were steady. "Not because I am naive about the danger, not because I don't understand what's happening, because," she stopped, looked at him in the chair that was hers, "because running is exactly what they want. And I have never in my life done what someone else wanted at the expense of what I decided." He looked at her for a long moment, the lamplight between them, the dying fire, the photograph face down on the chair arm. "It will get worse before it resolves," he said. "I know. I cannot guarantee." "I know," she said again, and something in how she said it made him stop. "I'm not asking you to guarantee anything, Nikolai. I'm telling you where I stand." She crossed her arms, the armored gesture, the self-reinforcing one. "Now go find your traitor. We can finish this conversation when you have." He rose, picked up the photograph, held it for a moment, then folded it and put it in his jacket pocket. A choice she noticed. He took it with him. At the door he paused, turned back once with his hand on the frame. "Lock the door," he said. "I was planning to." He left. She locked the door, stood in the center of her room and breathed once, fully, from the bottom, and let herself have the 30 seconds of feeling all of it before she put it back in order. The fear and the anger and the complicated, inconvenient, entirely unwelcome warmth of the moment before he left, when he had looked at her and something in him had been, briefly, completely visible. 30 seconds. Then she put it away. She went to her desk and got a new piece of paper and wrote down everything she had just learned, and everything she had just understood, and everything she still needed to know, in the careful 2-column format that she had used since law school. The facts and the questions. The 3rd column, what she didn't know about herself, she didn't open tonight. She was fairly clear on what was in it. She didn't need to examine it at 2 in the morning with a traitor somewhere in the house and the smell of Nikolai Sokolov's cedar and cold air still in the room. She went to bed without sleeping and listened to the house and waited for morning. Chapter 2. The morning after she ran at 5:30 despite everything. Mikkel was waiting at the rear entrance with the expression of a man who had not slept and was not going to comment on this. He had 2 colleagues with him rather than the usual solitary distance he maintained. She noted this without remarking on it. The world outside the gates was white and silent and absolute, the specific white of a Moscow morning after heavy snow, before the city woke, and churned it gray. She ran her route. Not the full 6 kilometers. The route had been adjusted. Mikkel communicated without words, by the fact that he and his colleagues formed a loose perimeter at a 100-meter radius that gently redirected her away from the roads with line-of-sight exposure. She ran 4 kilometers in the adjusted geography of a life under threat, and breathed the cold air, and listened to the crunch of snow under her feet and thought. She thought about the 4 candidates Nikolai had named. She thought about the architecture of betrayal, the particular psychographic profile of someone who had access to a powerful man's innermost operations and had chosen to sell that access. She thought about Vadim Merk and what she knew about him, which was limited to what Nikolai had told her and what she had quietly begun researching on her own in the past week. She thought about the timing, the fact that the breach had happened on the same night she'd had the most honest conversation she'd had with Nikolai since arriving. As if someone had been watching that too, she ran back through the gates at 6:15 and showered and dressed and went downstairs. The dining room was set for breakfast. Nikolai was already there. He looked like a man who had not slept and was declining to acknowledge it. His suit was fresh, different from yesterday, the gray of river ice, and his face was composed in the usual way, but she could see around the composition now. She was getting better at that. There were shadows under his eyes that the controlled expression didn't quite reach, and a quality in his stillness that was slightly different from the usual, tighter, more load-bearing. He looked up when she came in. Something in him settled fractionally, so small she would have missed it 2 weeks ago. He said. Not commanding, almost the other thing she sat. Galina appeared with coffee and withdrew with the practiced invisibility of a woman who understood atmospheres. Did you find the traitor? Sofia asked. Yes, she waited. Dmitry Vassin, he said. My 3rd security officer. He has been with the organization for 11 years. A pause. He has a daughter. She was taken 3 months ago. Merk used her to coerce him. His voice was level, but something in it was not level at all. Did not know about the daughter. He did not come to me. Sofia set down her coffee cup. Where is she now? Extracted this morning. She is in a safe location. Vassin, a pause, under guard, awaiting my decision. She looked at him carefully. What is your decision? He looked back. I haven't made it yet. This surprised her. She let the surprise show because she was past performing neutrality about things that genuinely reached her. You're conflicted. Endangered you. His voice was very controlled. He endangered the security of this household. He gave Merk access to information that could be used to. He stopped. He had reasons. I understand the reasons. A daughter held against her will is sufficient reason for most men to do most things. He looked at his coffee. I am deciding how much the reason matters against the consequence. She studied him. Is there a version of this where you don't kill him? He met her eyes. There is a version where the outcome serves the organization better than his death. A pause. And there is a version where I find that version because I am choosing to look for it. Something moved in her chest, quiet and complicated. He should be given the opportunity to fix what he did, she said. If he's willing, if he can feed Merk false information, he becomes an asset rather than a liability. Nikolai looked at her for a long moment. That is the version I was considering. Then consider it seriously. I am. They ate breakfast in a silence that was different from their usual silence, fuller somehow, more settled. She thought about the word extracted and what it had required at 5 a.m. to locate and recover a young woman being held by a rival criminal organization. She thought about the fact that Nikolai had done this before coming to breakfast. Daughter, she said. How old is she? 22. He paused. Her name is Anya. She was unharmed. Sofia nodded, filed it, felt the specific relief of unharmed as if it had been about someone she knew. Nikolai, she said. He looked up. I want to meet the 4 people on your candidate list. She held up a hand before he could speak. Not today, when this has settled. I want to understand the people in this house. I want to understand the geography of your trust. She held his gaze. I can't help you protect it if I don't understand what you're protecting. He was quiet for a moment. Then, why do you want to help me protect it? The question was direct and real, and she gave it the answer it deserved. Because whatever this is, she said, I've decided I'm in it. He held her gaze for 3 full seconds. Something passed between them, not a negotiation, not a concession, something older and more fundamental than either of those. After breakfast, he said, I'll introduce you to Andrei. She picked up her coffee. Good. Chapter 3. Andrei Zolotov was 47 years old, built like a man who had once been a soldier and had never quite stopped being one. And he had the particular quality of absolute loyalty that Sofia recognized immediately as the real kind. Not the performed loyalty of a man who fears consequences, but the structural loyalty of a man who has made his choice about who he serves and built his entire identity around it. He looked at her the way a man looks at a thing he has been warned about and is now encountering in 3 dimensions and finding the warning insufficient preparation. They stood in Nikolai's ground-floor study, the proper one, not the Eastern Corridor room. Andrei on one side of the room, Sofia near the window, Nikolai at the desk with his hands flat on the surface in the listening posture she was coming to know. Andrei has been with me for 16 years, Nikolai said. He knows everything about the operational structure of this household. He will answer your questions. Andrei did not look thrilled by this. He looked, in fact, like a man being introduced to a variable he'd advised against introducing. Mr. Zolotov, Sofia said, tell me about Vadim Merk's pattern of approach, not what he's done, what he does, the methodology. Andrei's expression shifted, reassessing. He selects pressure points that look like coincidences. Financial difficulty here, a family problem there. He waits for the structural weakness to appear and then he applies force to exactly the right place. He's patient. Extremely. Which means the cabinet breach, the photograph, is not the end of his move. It's a signal. He wanted us to know he'd been inside. Andrei glanced at Nikolai, back to Sofia. Yes, he's changing tactics. He's been patient for 2 years and now he's showing his hand. Why now? A pause. Andrei looked at Nikolai again. Mr. Zolotov, Sofia said, I understand you're deciding how much to tell me. I'm telling you that the half picture is more dangerous than the full one. If I am going to be used as leverage against Nikolai's position, and I am, that was established last night, then I need to understand what I'm being leveraged against. Andrei looked at Nikolai for a longer moment this time. Tell her, Nikolai said. Andrei turned back to Sofia with the expression of a man who has been given an order. He's going to follow even though he thinks it's a mistake. There is an agreement being negotiated, he said, between 3 organizations, ours, the Petrov Group out of St. Petersburg, and a European affiliate. A consolidation of certain supply and protection operations. If the agreement completes, the combined entity controls approximately 60% of the relevant market in Western Russia and the Baltic states. He paused. Merk has been excluded from this agreement, deliberately. If it completes, his organization becomes structurally irrelevant within 3 years. So he needs to stop it, or destroy the trust between the parties before it finalizes. The best way to destroy trust between 3 criminal organizations negotiating a consolidation is to demonstrate that one of the parties has a vulnerability, a personal exposure. Sofia stood at the window and looked out at the property, the snow, the tree line, the perimeter that was intact again and would now be, she knew, considerably more fortified. She thought about being a demonstration of vulnerability, about the function she served in this equation, which was entirely different from the function she served at dinner or in the library or in a chair by the fire. When does the agreement finalize? She asked. 4 weeks, Andrei said. Then we have 4 weeks before Merk makes his move in earnest. She turned from the window. What does he know about me specifically? We don't yet have a full picture of what Vasin gave him. Then find out. She looked at Nikolai. Today, if possible, I need to know what he has so I know what he can use. Nikolai looked at her with that expression, the cataloging one, the one she associated with recalibration. He nodded once at Andrei. Andrei left. At the door he paused and looked back at her with the expression of someone updating an assessment in real time. Then he left without saying anything. He's going to warm to me, Sofia said. He already has, Nikolai said. Andrei only pauses at the door for people he finds worth reconsidering. She turned back to the window. Outside, one of the security team was walking the perimeter, methodical, professional, doing the work of maintaining a boundary that had been proven, last night, permeable. The snow was soft and white and the morning light was crystalline and none of it looked like the setting for what it actually was. We need to present normally, Sofia said. Whatever events or appearances are scheduled in the next 4 weeks, we maintain them. Merk needs to believe his move hasn't changed anything. She paused. Which means I need to know your schedule, the public-facing one. She heard him rise from the desk, heard him cross the room. He came to stand beside her at the window, close, not touching, looking out at the same view. She was aware of him the way she was always aware of him at close range, the particular quality of his proximity, the warmth of him against the cold coming through the glass. There is a gathering next week, he said. A dinner. Significant people from the consolidation negotiation will be present. It was scheduled before, he paused. Before you were here. Now I will be there. Tell me who will be at this dinner. I will brief you fully. A pause. Sofia, she turned her head slightly. He was looking at the window, at the white world outside, and his profile in the winter light was the architecture she'd been studying for 3 weeks, the sharp line of jaw and cheekbone, the scar on the left side, the absolute controlled stillness of a man who had been managing an empire alone for a very long time. "Last night," he said. "When I came to your room and found you," he stopped. She waited. "I want you to understand something." His voice had the quality it sometimes had in the evenings, a bit less managed, a bit closer to the layer beneath the layer. "The fear I felt when I saw that note was not about the breach. It was not about Merck or the consolidation or what it means for the organization." He paused once more. "It was entirely about you." Room was very quiet. "I know," she said. He turned to look at her then. Close enough that the light caught his eyes in the way she had first noticed in the library, that layered gray, the winter sky at transition. Something in them was open in a way they were not usually open. "That cannot happen again," he said. "Someone getting into the house. You being in danger in this house." He held her gaze. "I will not." A stop. A start. "I need you to understand that the way I responded to that note last night is the clearest indication I can give you of exactly how compromised my judgment becomes when it concerns your safety." She looked at him. "Is that an apology?" "It is a warning." "About yourself." "Yes." She thought about this, about a man warning her about his own feelings with the same precision he applied to threat assessments. About obsession that had started as curiosity and moved through 4 years of surveillance and arrived here. At a window, at a morning after, at something that could not be called anything but what it was. "Nikolai," she said carefully, "when you say your judgment becomes compromised, I mean that I am capable," he said quietly, "of making decisions about this situation that are not fully rational, that are driven by variables I cannot measure or control. That concern you specifically in ways I have not." He stopped. "I have not been compromised by a person before. Not in this way. Not to this degree." "You're warning me because you think I should be concerned about that." She looked at him for a long time. At this man who had organized a 4-year surveillance operation and run a criminal empire and extracted a hostage at 5 in the morning, and was now standing at a window warning her that he had feelings that frightened him. "Feeling is mutual," she said. He went very still. "The compromised judgment," she clarified, keeping her voice even. "The irrational variable, the thing I cannot fully measure." She held his gaze. "I'm telling you so you know because you told me and because you asked for the truth and I intend to keep giving it to you even when it's inconvenient." A pause. "That's all. I'm not making a declaration. I'm balancing the information." He held her gaze for 3 seconds that were longer than 3 seconds. "Noted," he said very quietly. She turned back to the window. Outside, the snow was impossibly, beautifully still. Chapter 4. Vasin she asked to see him. Nikolai said no. She asked again with more specific reasoning. He said no again and this time gave her a reason. Vasin was being held in a lower-level room that was not a room she should know about, in a part of the property that was not a part she should know about, and this was non-negotiable. She accepted this. Not because she agreed with it, but because she had the intuition, born of 3 weeks of close observation, that there were things in Nikolai's operation that he was protecting her from specifically, not managing her ignorance for convenience, but genuinely building a firewall between her and certain knowledge. She didn't yet know if this was a form of care or a form of control. She suspected it was both, which was the kind of thing she was learning to expect from him. She spent the morning in the library. Working, she had case notes to review, correspondence to manage, 2 files that needed updating before her colleague Polina could continue them in her absence. The legal aid work was ongoing, the problems of her clients unchanged by the fact that her own life had acquired the shape of a thriller. Misha Petrov's housing dispute was approaching a hearing date. Elena Sorokina's situation in Meshchansky had resolved, narrowly, without escalating. She read and wrote and thought and found that the ordinary work of law, with its specific demands on attention and logic, was the most stabilizing thing available to her. At noon, Galina brought lunch to the library and with it quietly a piece of information. "Mr. Vasin has asked to speak with you." Sofia looked up from her papers. "With me specifically?" she said. Yes, she thought about this. About the fact that Vasin had not asked to speak with Nikolai, or perhaps had, and Nikolai had refused, but had asked for her. A man who had endangered her through his betrayal was asking for the woman he had endangered. "Tell Mr. Sokolov," she said carefully. Galina nodded and left. 20 minutes later, Nikolai appeared in the library doorway. His expression had the quality of a man who has considered something and arrived at a decision he doesn't entirely like. "He says he needs to tell you something," he said. "Something that is not that he won't tell me. Says it concerns you directly, your safety. Something he learned from Merck's people that is not about the consolidation." A pause. "He says he'll only tell you." She held Nikolai's gaze. She could see what it cost him to be standing here with this, the specific difficulty of a man who controlled everything being unable to control this particular piece. "Bring him here," she said. "Sofia, bring him to the library. You can be present. Andrei can be present, but bring him here and let him speak." Silence stretched. "He may be running a manipulation for Merck," Nikolai said. "The information may be designed to destabilize you specifically." "I know." She held his gaze. "I'm a lawyer, Nikolai. I've been in rooms with people running manipulations since I was 23. Bring him here." He held her gaze for another long moment. Then he left. Dmitry Vasin was 50 years old and had the appearance of a man who had aged a decade in 48 hours. He was not physically damaged. Nikolai had apparently chosen not to do that, which she noted. But he was exhausted in the bone-deep way of someone who has been living with a terrible secret for 3 months and has just been released from carrying it. He sat in the armchair she directed him to and looked at his hands. Nikolai stood behind her, near the door. Andrei stood to the side. Neither of them sat. "Mr. Vasin," Sofia said. Her voice was even, professional, the voice she used for difficult clients. "I understand you have something to tell me." He looked up. He had the eyes of a man who had done something he couldn't undo and knew it. "Before I say it, I want you to understand." He stopped, started again. "My daughter, she's safe," Sofia said. "Mr. Sokolov had her extracted this morning. She is safe." Something in him came apart slightly. A small, controlled collapse around the eyes. "Thank you," he said to the room, to no one specifically, to the air. "Mr. Vasin," he steadied. "Merck's people, when they made contact with me 3 months ago, when they told me they had Anya, they gave me information to make clear what they already knew about this household, to show me they were serious." He paused. "They told me things about Mr. Sokolov's situation that I hadn't known. Operational things, historical things." Another pause. "And they told me something about you." Sofia kept her hands still in her lap. "What did they tell you?" "That you were not a coincidence." He was looking at his hands again. "That your presence here was not simply a dead arrangement. They said." He stopped, looked up at her directly. "They said they had been aware of you for longer than Mr. Sokolov had, that their interest in you was independent, not contingent on your relationship here." Room was very still. "What does that mean?" she asked. "Independent interest in me specifically." Vasin looked at Nikolai for one brief, measuring moment, then back to Sofia. "They said your father was not the only reason you came to their attention, that there was something in your background, your family background, further back, that was relevant to Merck's operations." He paused. "They didn't tell me what. They showed me a file with your name on it, a thicker file than could have been assembled from your father's situation alone." He looked at her. "I don't know what's in it. I'm telling you it exists." Silence in the library was absolute. Sofia looked at him steadily. "A file about me, assembled by Merck's organization. Before I was here. Apparently before you were, yes." She looked at her hands. She looked at the fire. She thought about Nikolai's surveillance, 4 years of it, and the assumption she'd made, that she had been invisible until he found her. That she had been a private person living a private life until one man's obsession had placed her under a lens. The assumption had been wrong. There had been 2 lenses. "Is there anything else?" she asked. "No." He looked at Nikolai again, then at Sofia. "I'm sorry for what I did, I know." He stopped. "I know it doesn't resolve anything." Sofia said. "It doesn't." She looked at Andrei. "Please take Mr. Vasin back." Andrei moved. Vasin rose. At the door he paused without turning and said very quietly, "My daughter's name is Anya. She's studying architecture. She wants to design bridges." He paused. "I'm telling you because you asked about her this morning. You asked her name." He left. The library had 3 people in it. Then, too, Andrei closed the door. Nikolai crossed the room from the door in 3 deliberate steps and stopped near her chair. She was looking at the fire. She heard him sit in the chair across from her, Vasin's chair, cleared of Vasin, now his. "Your family background," he said. "I know what I know about my family," she said. "Which is that my mother died when I was 12 and my father is as advertised. There is nothing in my background that should be relevant to Vadim Merck. Unless there's something you don't know." She turned to look at him. He was watching her with the careful attention he gave all things that required reassessment. "My mother," she said slowly. She died when I was 12, a car accident. Yes, I know. Sofia stopped. She had a memory specific and clear, the kind that has been kept carefully, used frequently, the way you keep photographs of people you've lost. Her mother in the kitchen humming, her mother reading to her at night old fairy tales. Her mother quiet and graceful, and Sofia had always thought slightly sad in a way that children note without understanding. Her maiden name, Sofia said. Marchetti, Nikolai said. Elena Marchetti, Italian-Russian. Born in Genoa, 1963, relocated to Moscow at 24. He said it the way he said things he had memorized long ago. I went deep on your family history during the investigation. What did you find? A pause. The particular pause she was starting to associate with things he had been deciding whether to tell her. Her father, your maternal grandfather, had a name that appears in certain operational records from the 1980s and early 1990s. He held her gaze. Records that concern joint ventures between Russian organized crime and certain Italian affiliates of that period. She stared at him. My grandfather, she said. I could not determine the extent or nature of his involvement. He died in 1994, 2 years after your mother moved to Russia. A pause. I thought it was historical, irrelevant. Another pause. I may have been wrong. She sat with this for a long moment. The fire crackled. The snow was silent outside. Merck's organization has Baltic and European ties, she said slowly. Yes, if there were joint venture structures from the 1990s, old affiliations, old agreements, money that was moved and never fully accounted for. There could be claims, Nikolai said quietly. Old ones, the kind that never expire in this world. The kind that travel through bloodlines rather than legal structures. She looked at him. You think he believes he has some kind of claim on my family's, what, assets, connections, or that your existence represents a loose end from something your grandfather was involved in, something Merck inherited from whoever controlled those structures before him? He was very still. I don't know. I need to know. But what I know is that you are not only valuable to him as leverage against me. You are apparently of interest to him independently, she breathed, steady, careful. So there are 2 obsessed men, she said, and one of them wants to use me against the other. Nikolai held her gaze. There is only one obsessed man, he said quietly. The other has operational interests. There is a difference. She looked at him for a long moment. Yes, she said, there is. Chapter 5, The Dinner 5 Days. 5 days of a particular kind of preparation that Sofia had never undergone before and hoped, with moderate sincerity, never to undergo again. Though she was honest enough with herself to acknowledge that the hopping felt less sincere with each passing day, she was briefed. Extensively. Nikolai briefed her himself, in the library, at the long table with documents spread between them and the fire going, and the particular focused quality that he brought to any session where information needed to move from one person to another efficiently. She learned the names and the hierarchies and the relationships and the fault lines. She learned which men at the upcoming dinner were fully committed to the consolidation agreement and which were still persuadable, and which were there to observe and report back to their own interests. She learned the specific operational vanities and personal vulnerabilities of 12 people she had never met, delivered in the flat inventory of a man who had been managing these relationships for years. She was, she discovered, an excellent student. He was, she discovered, an excellent teacher. The efficiency between them was startling. She asked the right questions. He answered exactly what was asked without needing to be redirected. And by the 3rd session, she had the topology of his world mapped with a clarity that surprised her and seemed, from his expression, to surprise him too. You retain all of it, he said, after she'd identified, unprompted, the chain of loyalty connecting 3 attendees to a 4th who was the actual decision-maker. I'm a lawyer, she said. Retaining complex relational information is the job. People in your position would be overwhelmed. People in my position didn't choose to be here. She held his gaze across the table. I'm choosing now, there's a difference. He looked at her for a moment with that expression, the one she could read now, the one that was not quite what it looked like and was considerably more than its surface. Yes, he said, there is. Dress came on the 4th day. Not sent by him or not by him personally, she assumed, though the assumption had some uncertainty. Galena presented it with the manner of someone delivering something arranged, and with the implicit communication that it had been arranged correctly. She held it up. Black. which was fine, obvious, expected. But the cut was particular, long, structured, formal without the performance of formality, designed for a woman who was not there to be decorative. She turned to the mirror and held it against herself and thought about standing in a room full of dangerous men who would look at her and see what Nikolai had acquired, and she thought about what she wanted them to see instead. She thought about the gap between those two things and whether it was possible to close it in a single evening. She decided, partially. She could close it partially. The rest would take time. It fits correctly, she told Galina. Mr. Sokolov indicated you would want shoes with a practical heel. She paused. He specified that. Was very specific about the heel. She turned back to the mirror with the dress. She thought about a man who had watched her for 4 years and knew she ran 6 kilometers every morning and had the specific information that she did not wear shoes she couldn't move in quickly. She thought about what it meant that this knowledge had been applied to the selection of footwear for a formal dinner. She thought about the word protective and all the different shapes it took. Tell him thank you, she said. The dinner was in Moscow. A private dining room in a building that had a legitimate-looking cultural foundation on its ground floor and whatever it actually was on its upper floors. The armored car. Mikhail in the front. Nikolai beside her in the back, in black, the Patek Philippe on his wrist that she'd clocked the first evening, his face wearing its public architecture. They moved through the city in the black car, and the evening was Moscow at its most beautiful. The dome of the cathedral lit against the dark sky. The river throwing back the city lights in fractured gold, the snow still falling in the slow and deliberate way that made the whole city look like something suspended in time. She was looking out the window when she felt his gaze. She turned. He was watching her with an expression she hadn't seen before, not the assessing look, not the almost warm look. Something quieter and more complete, the expression of a man looking at something that matters to him in a way that he has been a long time accepting. She said. Nothing, he said, which meant something. Nikolai. You look, he stopped. She had the impression for once that the right word existed and he was simply not willing to give it. He looked back out his window. You look like someone who knows exactly why she's in this car. I do, she said. Good. A pause. Don't let them see that you do. She raised an eyebrow. You want me to appear less capable than I am? I want them to underestimate you. People who underestimate you. He glanced back at her. They give themselves away. They say things they wouldn't say to someone they were being careful around. She looked at him. You're asking me to play a role. I'm asking you to use the impression people make of you before they know better. His eyes held hers. You are exactly who you are. I am asking you to let them conclude for approximately 1 evening that you are less. That's cynical. That's operational. The corner of his mouth. The shadow of the thing that was almost a smile. Both, he agreed. She turned back to the window and thought about the specific performance of smallness, the art of appearing to take up less space than you occupied. She had done it before. Every woman she knew had done it, the practiced contraction that made men comfortable. She'd spent the last 3 years doing the opposite, expanding deliberately into every room she entered, filling her professional space completely, refusing the habitual apology of the understated. She could do it once. For operational reasons. She was fairly clear that it would not stick. The building when they arrived was discreet by the standards of what it contained. 12 men in suits who controlled, between them, the movement of enormous amounts of money and considerable violence through a significant portion of Europe. Sofia walked in on Nikolai's arm and felt the quality of attention that moved through the room at their arrival. Complex, multi-layered, the specific attentiveness of dangerous people, cataloging a new element in a situation they were all simultaneously assessing. She let them underestimate her. She did it well. She had, as Nikolai had observed, considerable ability to perform whatever version of herself the situation required, and the version required here was the one that had always been the easiest to perform and the hardest to inhabit. The woman at the powerful man's side who was there because he wanted her there rather than because she had chosen to be. She was excellent at it. She despised every minute of it. She sat beside Nikolai at the long table and ate and smiled and deflected and performed the specific social intelligence of a woman who was paying attention but appeared not to be. And she listened. With the full, trained attention she brought to depositions and client interviews, and the careful reading of documents designed to obscure rather than reveal. She listened, and she retained, and the topology she'd built from the briefings acquired flesh and tone and specificity as the dinner went on. She noted that the man across the table, Grigory Petrov, heir to the St. Petersburg operation, the most critical of the three parties, spent 12 minutes talking to Nikolai about the consolidation terms and approximately the same amount of time watching her. Not predatorily, assessingly. He was deciding something about her that he hadn't yet decided. She noted that the man at the far end of the table, pale, Baltic-accented, described in her briefing as an independent operator whose alignment was undetermined, made 2 phone calls during dinner that he attempted to conceal and did not entirely succeed at concealing. She noted that one of Nikolai's own men, seated 3 chairs down, spent 4 minutes in conversation with a guest that, given the guest's connections, should not have occurred in this room tonight. She noted all of this and stored it with the precision she'd been applying to information for 3 weeks, and then something happened that she had not anticipated. Petrov leaned across the table during a lull in the broader conversation and said directly to her, in the tone of a man who has decided to ask the real question, "Tell me, Ms. Volkov, what is your professional background?" She felt Nikolai still beside her. She had been planning to answer as briefed, deflect with social pleasantry, appear engaged but uninformed. She met Petrov's eyes across the table and made a different decision. "A lawyer," she said. "Legal aid primarily, housing rights, family law, criminal defense for people who couldn't otherwise access representation." Petrov blinked. Whatever answer he'd been prepared for, it wasn't that. "Legal aid. For 3 years, yes. Before that, I trained at Moscow State, first in my cohort." She picked up her wine glass. Not challenging, simply factual, in the precise manner of a man she'd been learning from for 3 weeks. "I turned down a corporate position because I found the work more interesting where the law actually touches people's lives." Petrov studied her. Something in his face was shifting. The reassessment she'd been watching happen to Andrei happening faster here, more visibly, because Petrov was a man with less reason to hide his impressions. "And how does a lawyer who works in legal aid come to be sitting at this table?" She held his gaze. "Honestly," a slight pause from Petrov. "Yes, I was traded for a gambling debt." She kept her voice even and pleasant, the way one might describe a slightly inconvenient travel delay. "But I found the situation considerably more interesting than anticipated." The silence around that section of the table lasted approximately 1 second. Then Petrov laughed, a real laugh, short and surprised and genuine. He looked at Nikolai with an expression of distinct recalibration. Nikolai, she noted from the corner of her eye, was looking at her with an expression she had not seen before and could not immediately categorize. It was not the cataloguing expression. It was something beyond that. Something that had no operational name. "Interesting," Petrov said. He picked up his own wine. "I think I underestimated this dinner." "People underestimate most things," Sofia said pleasantly. "It's the source of considerable opportunity." Petrov smiled. He looked at Nikolai. "I like her," he said, with the directness of a man who was used to saying exactly what he meant. Nikolai said nothing. But something in his stillness was not its usual quality, and she understood precisely, in that moment, that he was feeling something he had no word for either. Chapter 6. The ride HOMETHE car was warm, and the city moved past the windows in its amber winter light, and the space between them on the back seat was occupied by something that had not been there on the way to the dinner. "Man at the far end," she said. "The Baltic one. He made 2 calls during dinner. One to a number I couldn't identify, one to," she paused. "Based on the length of the call and the fact that he stepped to the east side of the room, I think the second call was to someone in or near the building." Nikolai looked at her. "Lev Danchenko. Alignment is genuinely undetermined, or is he already in Merck's POCKET? I have been uncertain. After tonight, I'm less uncertain. He is already in Merck's pocket." "He came to assess the dinner's outcome and report back." She paused. "The man 3 chairs from you, your man, his conversation with ROMESCU. I saw it. WHAT was at ABOUT. A pause. It should not have occurred." "It shouldn't." She turned to look at him directly. "Is he a second VASIN or is he someone who made a MISDAKE? I don't know yet." His jaw was tight. "I will know by morning. FIND out before you decide what it means." She held his gaze. "There's a difference between someone being turned by Merck and someone having an indiscretion. The response should be different." He looked at her. "When did you start advising me on how to manage my POPLE?" WHEN, you decided to brief me extensively on all of them. She turned back to the window. PETROV, she said. He's committed, or close to it. He came tonight uncertain, and he's leaving satisfied, not because of the terms, but because of the table. He made a decision about this partnership tonight that was personal rather than operational, and you need to consolidate that before he has time to be managed back toward uncertainty by whoever has his ear. NIKOL, I was quiet for a moment. What did he DECIDE? HE decided you were stable. She paused. I don't mean professionally. I mean, he was assessing whether you were the kind of man who could sustain a long-term alliance without the alliance being consumed by whatever personal instabilities you carry. She looked back at NIKOL. He looked at you, and then he looked at me, and he made a calculation. CALCULATION. THAT, a man who chooses a wife like me is a man who is interested in something other than compliance. She held his gaze. He was right to think that's a stability indicator. Men who surround themselves with things that agree with them are not stable. They're building an echo chamber for their own unchecked impulses. A pause. You told me once you chose me because I couldn't be managed. PETROV saw the same thing in about 40 minutes. HE held her gaze. I was not performing vulnerability tonight, she said. When PETROV asked about my background and I told him the truth, that was not the role. That was my assessment of what the room needed. I know. YOU said don't let them SE. I know what I said. He looked at her with something that was not quite any of the expressions she'd CATALOGUED, something that was either a new entry or the one she'd been approaching the edge of for 3 weeks. You made the right call. For the same reasons I told you not to let them see, except you read the room and determined that the strategy had inverted. PETROV needed to see me clearly, she said. If he'd left that dinner thinking I was furniture, his assessment of you would have been incomplete. You were protecting my position, he said, not a question. I was making an operational decision, she said carefully. My interests. SHE looked out the window. In our interests. Car was quiet for a long moment. The city lights moving across the glass, the sound of snow under the tires. SOFIA. His voice had the quality it sometimes had late in the evenings, a layer removed. She turned. WHAT, I said this morning, about compromised judgment. He held her gaze in the dark of the car. I want to be clear about something. SHE waited. WHEN, I said the feeling was that the protection could not be separated from the wanting. I was being imprecise. You. WHAT, I meant. He stopped. The stop of a man who has precise language available to him and is choosing between precision and truth. What I meant is that they are not two things that coexist. They are the same thing. The wanting is protective. They have the same root. SHE looked at him. At the GREY eyes and the sharp jaw and the scar and the controlled, careful, deeply private face of a man who had watched her for 4 years without being able to say this. THAT is a significant thing to say, she said. YES. You're saying it in a car. A pause, the shadow of the smile. The location seemed contained. SHE looked back at the city, at the lights and the snow and the dome of the cathedral passing the window again as they turned back toward the estate. WHEN, we get home, she said. I want to tell you something too. Right, he said. SOMETHING from the third column, she said. He knew what the third column was. She'd mentioned it in passing 2 weeks ago, and she had been watching since then to see if he retained it. He did. He always did. All right, he said again. The rest of the ride was quiet. But it was the quiet of 2 people who have agreed to have a conversation, the anticipatory quiet that has weight and warmth and the particular quality of a threshold not yet crossed. She looked out at Moscow passing the window. She thought about what she was going to tell him. She thought about the third column and the items in it, and the one she'd written last night and circled twice. She thought about the fact that she was not afraid. Chapter 7. The third COLUMNHE poured whiskey. She declined and then reconsidered and accepted, because the conversation she was about to have was one she wanted to have with her full faculties intact, and the whiskey was, paradoxically, the thing most likely to maintain them, the glass in her hand as anchor. They were in the study. His study, the permitted one. The fire had been built up and the room was warm and the window showed the estate in its night configuration, perimeter lights, the dark pine forest beyond, the particular deep quiet of snow. Thing I found when I came here, she said, that I wasn't expecting to find. HE was in the chair across from her. He had his glass and his stillness and the careful attention he gave things that mattered. I was expecting a negotiation, she said. I was expecting to manage a transaction. A forced marriage in a world I understood intellectually but had kept at a deliberate distance for my entire adult life. I expected, she paused. I expected to maintain myself by not engaging, by being here without being here, if you understand what I mean. I understand. I have not been able to do that. He was very still. I have tried, she said, in the professional way. Mapping the situation, managing my exposure, maintaining the analytical distance that usually protects me from. She stopped, looked at the glass in her hands. From caring about outcomes I can't fully control. Sofia, I quote him getting there. She looked up, met his eyes. The thing I found that I wasn't expecting, the thing in the third column. She breathed. Is that the most dangerous place I have ever been is also the first place in a very long time that I have felt. The word was precise, and she used it precisely. Found. Room held that. Survilled, she said. I know the distinction. I'm making it deliberately. Found. Seen. Understood in the specific way that requires someone to have paid the particular quality of attention to you that you have paid to me. She held his gaze. I don't know what to do with that. I am a lawyer, and I am good at my work, and I am good at being alone, and I have been genuinely fine without being known this closely. A pause. I have been here 3 weeks, and I am no longer sure that's entirely true. Fire crackled. He set down his glass. He rose from his chair and crossed the small distance between them and came to stand in front of her. And she stood too, not in reaction, but in the instinct that said this conversation should be had standing, that the approach of it required being fully upright in her own body. He was close. The way he had been in the library at the bookshelf, the way he had been at the window that morning. Close enough that the warmth of him was a physical thing. His eyes in the firelight were the layered gray she had spent 3 weeks learning the vocabulary of, and in them was everything. Not managed, not composed, the full uncontained version of everything he had been holding precisely and carefully for 4 years. Sofia, he said. His voice was very low. I know, she said. I need you to know that whatever happens with Merck, whatever happens with the consolidation, with the traitor, he stopped. Started in a different place. I need you to know that it was not the debt, it was not the arrangement. Those were, he looked at her. Those were the mechanism, they were not the reason. I know, she said again. Reason? He lifted one hand slowly, with the deliberateness of a man performing the first voluntary action in a long time, and touched her face. His thumb along her cheekbone, the lightest thing, barely contact at all, and her entire nervous system responded to it with a precision that was startling. The reason has been the same since the beginning. She held his gaze. 4 years, she said quietly. 4 years, he confirmed. She reached up and covered his hand with hers, held it there. The firelight between them and the snow outside and the particular weight of a moment that had been approaching for a very long time. Nikolai, she said. Yes. I need you to understand that I am not here because I have nowhere else to go. I know. I am choosing this, specifically, with full information about what you are and what this is. She held his gaze. That is the distinction I need you to hold. His hand moved, turning slightly under hers, his palm now warm against her face. I know the difference, he said. Between choosing and having no choice, I know which one this is. Good, she said. He kissed her. Not urgently, not with the pent-up intensity of 4 years finally released, which was what she might have expected. Gently, precisely. With the quality of a man who has waited long enough that the waiting itself has become a practice and the ending of it can be approached without haste. His hand was still on her face. Her hand was still over his. The fire was behind them. When he pulled back, his expression was, there was no word for it. She filed it under new entry and held it. Dinner, he said, his voice slightly different than before. You told Petrov the truth, that you were traded for a debt and found it more interesting than anticipated. That's still true. A pause. The more interesting than anticipated. She looked at him. At the sharp jaw and the gray eyes and the man she had spent 3 weeks refusing to categorize and had just categorized anyway definitively in the most inconvenient possible direction. Considerably more, she said. He smiled. A real one, small and brief and gone almost immediately, but there. The first one she'd seen in full, she understood, looking at it, why he kept it controlled. It changed his face completely. It made him, she did not have a word for this either, but it was warm and serious and deeply, dangerously personal, and she filed it under things I will now want to see again. Chapter 8. The thing about morning, she did not go to bed, not immediately. Not for the reasons she could hear Galina thinking, on the other side of the house, in the particular quality of the late-night domestic stillness, that carries its own kind of inference. She stayed because the conversation continued, not the emotional kind, the operational kind, and the operational kind was urgent enough that it displaced the question of how one goes about separating two people who had just arrived at the beginning of something. The man at the dinner table. Nikolai's man. Valentin Roche, 33 years old, 3 years with the organization, originally from Saratov. Nikolai spread the report on the desk between them. She stood on one side and he on the other, and they looked at the documents with the focused attention of two people who had just had a moment and were choosing, in perfect silent agreement, to put the moment in a drawer and deal with the immediate threat. His conversation with Romsku lasted 9 minutes, Nikolai said. Andrei has the recording. The content is, he paused, ambiguous. Romsku is independently positioned. He is not a Merck affiliate. He is a person who trades in information, an intelligence broker. So Roche may have been selling information that didn't go to Merck, went somewhere. The question is where and what. Nikolai looked at the report. It could be independent opportunism, Roche selling ambient information to a secondary party without comprehending the connectivity. He paused. Or it could be a more sophisticated architecture, information sold to Romsku who resells to Merck at arm's length. The second scenario is more dangerous because it's harder to trace and easier to deny. She looked at the documents. Do you have a complete record of Roche's communications for the past 3 months? Andrei is compiling it. She straightened. Get it before you decide anything. Don't move on him until you know the full picture. She held Nikolai's gaze. If Vassen's situation taught us anything, it's that the obvious interpretation of a betrayal isn't always the complete one. He looked at her. You said us, she paused. I did. The room was quiet, not the awkward kind. I need to sleep, she said. And you need to review that communication record and brief Andrei. She moved toward the door. And we need, she stopped. What? She turned back. He was standing at his desk with the reports on one side and the dying fire on the other, and the specific quality of his attention on her was the one she could read now, the full, unmanaged version that had no performance in it. We need to be careful, she said. Not of this. She gestured between them briefly. Of what Merck will do with it when he identifies it. Nikolai held her gaze. He already knows about my interest in you. Knows about the surveillance, she said. He knows about the acquisition. He doesn't yet know, she paused. He doesn't know what this actually is, and when he does, he will try to use it differently than he would use a transaction. Nikolai was still. You warned me this morning that your judgment was compromised where I'm concerned, she said. I'm telling you that Merck will aim directly at the specific nature of that compromise the moment he identifies it. She held his gaze. So we need to be very careful and very clear, and we need to not let what happened tonight become something either of us loses operational clarity over. He looked at her for a long moment. You are telling me to be careful with my own feelings. I am telling you that your feelings are now a target, she said. So is mine, and we are both better than that. She met his eyes. We are going to be better than that. He held her gaze. Go review the report, she said. I'll see you at breakfast. She left. In the corridor, she paused. Pressed her hand flat against the wall in the same gesture she had used in the hallway outside his study 3 weeks ago, on the night she'd burned the photograph. The anchoring gesture. She breathed once. She was in love with Nikolai Sokolov. She understood this with the clarity she brought to all self-assessment. She had been moving toward it since the library and the Chekhov and the fire, and the 4 years admitted flatly in the dark. And it was done now. The recognition was complete, and she could not unreasonize herself back out of it. She was also, simultaneously and without contradiction, in the middle of a serious and potentially lethal situation that required the clearest thinking she had ever applied to anything. She stood in the corridor and held both truths at once. Then she went to bed and slept, and in the morning she ran her 6 kilometers with Mikhail at his respectful 200 meters, and the snow was crisp, and the air was cold, and the city was waking up around her. And she ran and breathed and let herself have the particular complicated happiness of a woman who has fallen in love under the worst possible circumstances and is nonetheless, irrevocably, glad. Chapter 9. What Andrei found the communication record took 2 days to compile. It was, Andrei reported at the kitchen table, with the flatness of a man delivering news he had been hopping to deliver differently. Not good. Valentin Roche had been selling information for 11 months. Not to Merck, not directly. to Romsku, who had been reselling in 3 directions simultaneously, one of which was a channel that led, through 2 removes, to Merck's operations manager in Vilnius. The information Roche had sold was not operational in the critical sense. He hadn't given up movement schedules or security protocols or anything that would directly compromise the Sokolov organization's physical security. What he had sold was softer than that. Names, relationship maps, the texture of internal dynamics. The kind of ambient social intelligence that seemed harmless and wasn't. He had sold, 11 months ago, a detailed account of Nikolai's interest in Sofia Volkov, before the dead arrangement. Before she was here, she absorbed this at the kitchen table with her coffee and the winter light coming through the window and Andrei's flat recitation and Nikolai very still at the other end of the table. "So Merck didn't learn about me from Vassin," she said. "No," Andrei said. "He had the information considerably earlier. Vassin confirmed and updated it, but the original source was Roche." She looked at Nikolai. His face was doing the thing she had come to understand as suppressed fury, not the hot variety, but the cold, precise kind, the kind that was worse. 11 months, he said. "Yes." "Has known about Sofia for 11 months. "Yes." Which meant, she thought, that the file Vassin described, the independent file Merck's people had assembled about her, was at least partially built from Roche's intelligence. That her connection to Nikolai had been Merck's entry point, and her own background, whatever was in her family history that was relevant, had been a discovery he'd made while digging into that entry point. "Where is Roche now?" she asked. "Under guard," Andrei said. "He does not know the extent of what we've discovered." She looked at Nikolai again. He was looking at the table with the flat expression of a man who is calculating. She watched him calculate. She had learned to read the cadence of it, the way his jaw tightened fractionally and then released when the calculation arrived at a conclusion. "Kill him," she said. Nikolai looked at her. "He's more useful as a disinformation channel," she said. "We know what he's selling. We know his roots. If we keep him in place and begin feeding him selective information, we control what Merck receives." She held Nikolai's gaze. "It's the same principle as Vassin. Roche becomes an asset. Sold your existence to a man who is now targeting you," Nikolai said. His voice was very even. "He built the foundation for—" "I know." She met his eyes steadily. "I know what he did. I'm telling you the operationally correct response." "Operationally correct response," he repeated. "Yes." "You're remarkably composed about the man who— What would you prefer? That I be composed and useful and contribute to the solution, or that I be angry and satisfy the anger and lose the asset?" She held his gaze. "I'm angry, Nikolai. I'm choosing not to perform it because there's work to do. There's a difference." He held her gaze for a long moment. Andrei looked at his coffee. "Keep him in place," Nikolai said. Not to Andrei, to her, as if the decision was being made by her endorsement. "Brief me on the disinformation protocol." Chapter 10. Irina, she came back on a Thursday. Sofia heard the gate alert from her study and went to the window with the coffee she just poured and looked down at the car coming up the drive and recognized it before she could see who was in it. The blonde woman. The coat. The particular quality of arrival, not hostile, not friendly, something in between that was its own kind of tension. She stayed at the window until Irina Volkova got out of the car and looked up at the house. For a moment their eyes met, or Sofia's eyes met the general direction of Irina's face from above, which amounted to the same thing. She did not step back from the window. Irina looked away first. Sofia went downstairs. Galina intercepted her in the main hallway with the expression of someone who had been hopping to intercept her earlier. "Ms. Volkov," Mr. Sokolov asked. "I know," Sofia said pleasantly. "I'd like to see his guest anyway." She found them in the drawing room. Not the formal one, the smaller one off the main corridor that Nikolai used for conversations he didn't want held in his office. The door was open. She knocked on the frame. Both of them looked at her. Nikolai's face ran through 3 things in rapid succession: recognition, the flash of something she associated with concern, and the decision to let this proceed. 3 seconds. She understood all of it. Irina was standing by the window. Up close she was striking, the particular kind of striking that required maintenance, the studied grace of a woman who had learned to be beautiful as a profession. She was about Sofia's age, possibly a year or 2 older. Her eyes, looking at Sofia, were complicated. "I apologize for the intrusion," Irina said. Her voice was controlled, not unfriendly, careful. "I realize this is—" "Sit down," Sofia said. "Both of you." A pause. Irina sat. Nikolai, who was already standing, remained standing, which was fine. Sofia sat across from Irina. Sofia Volkov, she said. I think you know who I am. I'd like to know who you are. Not the relationship history, she said, with a brevity that drew slightly from the air in the room. I mean who you are to the organization, your position, what Nikolai trusts you with. Irina blinked. Whatever she'd been prepared for, it wasn't this. Irina worked with me for 4 years, Nikolai said from his standing position. His voice was careful. She ran a financial intelligence operation. She is a pause. She is one of the few people in the organization who could be trusted with certain sensitive. Can she still be trusted? Sofia asked him directly, a silence. Yes, Nikolai said. Sofia looked back at Irina. Then why are you here today? Not as a personal visit. You came today for a specific reason. Irina looked at Nikolai once, then at Sofia. I have information, she said slowly. About Merk, I still maintain contacts in certain circles. I heard something yesterday that, she paused. I came directly. Sofia looked at Nikolai. Then you should hear it, he said. I should. He looked at Sofia with an expression that was, she didn't have a precise word for it, but it was the expression of a man encountering something he is revising his understanding of. Leave you to it, Sofia said. She rose. At the door she paused because something in her needed to not leave this room having only performed graciousness. She turned back. Irina, she said. The other woman looked at her. What it's worth, Sofia said. I'm not here because he chose me over you. I'm here because of a very specific set of circumstances that you don't need to make into something personal. She held the other woman's gaze. I hope the information is useful. She left the room. In the corridor, she breathed the 30-second allowance she gave herself for things that cost more than she showed, and then she went back upstairs and picked up her case notes and worked. 20 minutes later, Nikolai appeared in the study doorway. She has reliable information, he said. Merk is moving the timeline up. The consolidation dinner accelerated something he wasn't expecting. He's planning an intervention before the agreement finalizes. How long do we have? 12 days. She set down her pen. That's not enough time, he said. It isn't. He came into the study, looked at her across the desk. What you said to Irina, I meant it. I know you did. He paused. That was, he stopped, started differently. Most people in your position would have handled that very differently. Not most people in my position, she said. No, he said. You are not. And the way he said it, quiet, certain, without performance, was the most complete sentence she had heard from him yet. Chapter 11, 12 days, 12 days. The house changed quality during those 12 days. Not in any visible way, the same rooms, the same staff, the same mornings with coffee in the library before Nikolai's schedule consumed him. The change was atmospheric. The air was a degree tighter. Andrei's check-ins became twice daily. The perimeter configuration changed in ways she couldn't see, but could sense by the altered rhythm of security rotations. Mikhail, at her door each morning for the run, had company he hadn't had the week before. She worked. Her legal cases, her case notes, the correspondence with Polina about the files being held in her absence. She also worked on the problem of Merk with the same focused attention, reading what she could access about his organization, building her own map of his structure from the fragments available. Asking questions of Andrei in the evenings that Andrei answered with increasing lack of resistance. She and Nikolai had dinner every night. The dinners had changed since the study, not dramatically, not in any way that was visible to Galina or the staff, but in every way that was visible to the two people sitting across from each other. The silences were fuller. The conversations went places they hadn't gone before. He asked about her childhood, and she answered without the careful self-protection she had maintained in the first weeks. And she asked about his, about Yekaterinburg, about the father who'd been absent, about the uncle who'd been replaced. And he answered in the flat, precise way that she understood now was not coldness, but the particular courage of a man who had stored his wounds in the only container he had. On the 8th day, she found the second photograph. Not the surveillance kind. A different kind again. She was in the library, looking for the Akhmatova she'd found once and lost again, and it was there on the shelf where she finally located it, not between books this time, not hidden. Simply placed on the shelf beside the poetry collection as if it had been set there deliberately for her to find. A drawing. Pencil. Spare and precise, her face. Not from a photograph she could tell immediately, from life or from memory. The proportions were specific to his memory of her rather than to the objective geometry of her face, her eyes slightly larger than they were, her jawline with its characteristic combination of softness and determination. She was looking slightly to the left of the picture plane. She looked, the word that came was inhabited, like a person in full possession of themselves. She stood for a long time holding it. Then she went to find him. He was in his office. He looked up when she came in. He saw what she was holding, and his expression did something complicated, not quite embarrassment, because she didn't think he was capable of straightforward embarrassment, but the particular quality of being seen in the making of something private. "You draw," she said, occasionally. "This is from memory." She looked at the drawing, at the face that was hers and was also the product of someone else's long-held attention. "When did you make this?" A pause. "Last week." "After?" "Yes." She set it down on his desk between them, looked at him. "I want you to know that I found it," she said, "and I want you to know that I'm keeping it." He held her gaze. "And I want you to know," she stopped. She had been thinking about what she wanted to say for 2 days, which was 2 days longer than she usually needed. "That the quality of attention you have given me is terrifying and specific, and it is the most intimately known I have ever been." She paused. "And I have spent 3 years of my adult life very deliberately building a life that was mine and only mine, and I do not want to lose that." She held his gaze. "And I also," a longer pause, "I am also finding, against all expectation, that being known at this depth is not the thing I thought it was. It is not loss. It is," she searched. "It is addition," Nikolai said quietly. She looked at him. "Yes," she said. "It is addition." He stood, came around the desk. Stood in front of her close, the way they were close now, the way she had stopped being surprised by and started being quietly sustained by. He picked up the drawing, held it for a moment. "You are different every day," he said. "This is the problem I've been trying to solve for 4 years." He looked at the drawing and then at her. "Every report, every photograph, it was not enough because you are not a static subject. He paused. "You are constantly in motion, not physically. In here." He touched 2 fingers briefly to his own chest. "So you needed me here," she said, "where you could watch me in real time." "I needed you here," he said, "because the version of you in the reports was not sufficient." She looked at him for a long moment. "That is the most oblique confession I have ever received." "I am not practiced at this," she agreed. "You are not." She took the drawing from his hand. "I'm keeping it," she said again. He looked at her. "I know." She turned to go. "Sofia." She stopped, turned. He was standing at his desk with his hands at his sides and his face with the full unmanaged expression, the one she could read, the one that was the complete and undivided truth of him. "4 more days," he said, "and then this resolves one way or another, and then," he paused. "I want to discuss the terms of this arrangement." "The marriage terms?" "The terms of what this actually is," he said. "What it becomes with full information, with choice." She held his gaze. "You're asking me to choose again." "I'm asking you to choose with more information than you had the first time." He held her gaze steadily. "Because I need to know that what you're choosing is this, and not the circumstances that preceded it." She stood in the doorway with the drawing in her hand, and looked at him and thought about 4 years and about everything she knew and everything she still didn't. And she thought about what it meant that the most controlled and dangerous man she had ever met was standing in his office asking her to choose him freely. 4 days, she said. "Yes. Then we talk." She left. Chapter 12. The night before the 4 days ended, she couldn't sleep, not from fear or not only. She lay in the dark and listened to the house and thought about Merk, and about the 12 days they'd had and the preparations Andre had made and the disinformation they'd fed through Rosh, and she thought about whether it would be enough. She thought about her grandfather, about the files she hadn't seen, about the claim, if it was a claim, if Nikolai's reading of it was correct, that Merk believed he had some inherited right to something connected to her blood. She thought about her mother in the kitchen, humming. At 2 in the morning, she got up and went to the library. He was there. She stopped in the doorway. He was in his chair, the right-hand one, the one that had become his in the past week by the simple geography of repeated choice. He had a book and the fire and the glass of whiskey and the expression of a man who was not reading the book, who had not been reading the book. He looked up, unsurprised, as if he'd known she'd come. "Can't sleep," she said. "No," she went to the other chair. They sat in the configuration that had become, over 3 weeks and then some, the most natural geography in her life. The fire between them, the books around them, the winter outside. "Tell me about your mother," she said. He looked at the fire. "My mother died when I was 9, he said. "My father was not present before or after. My uncle took me." A pause. "Dmitri was not a kind man. He was a clear man." He believed in intelligence and order and the use of violence as a precise instrument rather than an expression of character. He paused. He was not cruel to me specifically. He was simply not interested in softness. You miss it, softness. A very long pause. I didn't know I was missing it until he stopped. You found someone who had it, she said quietly. He looked at her. You don't have softness in the conventional sense. You have something else. He turned back to the fire. Something that is the same thing but harder. More, he searched. More enduring. She looked at the fire too. I missed softness too, she said. After my mother died, my father was he tried, but he is a man of a particular generation and formation, and grief made him. She paused. Smaller. He became smaller with grief. I became larger because someone had to. A pause. I resented it for years. Then I stopped resenting it and just became the person it made me. The person who cannot be managed, he said. Person who decided that was worth being. She paused. My mother was soft in the way you describe. She hummed in the kitchen. She read to me every night. She stopped on the memory. She was the most present person I have ever been near. She was entirely, completely here. Then she wasn't. She breathed. If Merck's interest in me is connected to her family. We'll find out tomorrow, Nikolai said. If he shows himself, his voice was certain. The disinformation we fed through Rosh told him the consolidation signing has moved to tomorrow night. He will move before then. Doesn't know we're prepared. No, she looked at the fire. I want to be there, she said. When he moves, I don't want to be put somewhere safe and kept in the dark. A long pause. Sofia, I know what you're going to say. You don't. You're going to say it's dangerous and that my presence compromises the operational picture and that you need to concentrate, and you can't concentrate if you're managing my safety. She turned to look at him. And all of those things are true. And I'm not asking to be in the room where the confrontation happens. I'm asking not to be locked away like something that needs to be kept safe from real life. He looked at her. I want to be in this house, she said. Informed, present, aware. That's all not, she paused. Not a weapon he can use against you, but not furniture either. He held her gaze for a long time. You will be in the secure room on the ground floor, he said. With Andrei's second, with full communication access, you will know everything as it happens. Thank you. Don't thank me, he said. It's the correct decision, not a concession. A pause. There's a difference. She recognized her own words in his mouth and felt the thing that recognition produced, warm and complicated and specifically, personally his. Nikolai, she said. He looked at her. Whatever happens tomorrow. She held his gaze. I have already chosen. He was very still. Not waiting for 4 days, she said. I'm telling you now, I choose this, I choose you. She held his eyes. Not the circumstances, not the arrangement, you. Full information with complete awareness of what you are with everything. She breathed. That is the truth from the third column. He rose from his chair. She rose too. The fire between them. He crossed the distance between them and took her face in both hands with the precise, deliberate care he brought to all things. And he looked at her for one long, full moment, the unmanaged look. The one she could read, the one that was all of it, and then he said, very quietly, I chose you 4 years ago. A pause. I have been waiting for you to catch up. She laughed, a real one, surprised out of her, and his expression at the sound of it was something she would keep. That, she said, is the most arrogant thing I have ever heard. It is also true, he said. It is also true, she agreed. And then, in the firelit library with the snow outside and the house quiet and the morning coming, she let herself have the full, unguarded truth of what she had been choosing for 3 weeks. Chapter 13. What Marek sent instead. She was in the secure room on the ground floor at midnight when the alert came. Not an external breach. Not Merck himself arriving at the gates with men and vehicles, and the operatic violence she had been half expecting. Something smaller and more precise. A message. Delivered through channels that should not have been accessible, a frequency that belonged to an internal communication system that was, as far as Andrei had been able to determine, fully secured. Someone with access to internal frequencies had sent a message. She read it on the monitor in the secure room with Andrei's second at her shoulder and felt the cold move through her that she had learned to call informational alarm, the specific chill of a fact that changes the shape of everything adjacent to it. The message was addressed to her. Not to Nikolai. To Sofia Volkov, née Marchetti, her mother's name. Her name before the marriage. The name Sofia had never carried, had never been given officially, was simply the blood name of a woman who had moved to Moscow 24 years ago and married Pyotr Volkov. She read the message twice. She called Nikolai on the channel Andrei's second handed her. "There's a message," she said. "On the internal frequency. Addressed to me." A pause. "Read it." She read it. The silence on the other end of the channel was the particular silence of a man whose calculations have just been disrupted by a variable he did not adequately weight. "He's not coming here," Nikolai said. "No." She looked at the message. "He's saying he already has what he came for." "That's not possible." "He says." She stopped. She had been maintaining her voice level throughout, and it was about to become difficult to maintain. "He says the consolidation agreement is already compromised." "He says he has a recording of the dinner." A pause. "Of the dinner, Nikolai, private conversation captured at the table." She looked at the message. "He says the Petrov organization received it this morning. He says Petrov has withdrawn from the consolidation." Silence was longer this time. "He had someone at the dinner," she said. Nikolai said quietly, "Not a question, not yet." She looked at the message. At the very end of it, after the operational statement, after the declaration of what Merck had taken and what he was leaving them with, "P.S. Ask her about her grandfather's account in Zurich, the one that was never closed. She doesn't know about it, but we do. And it answers every question she has been asking. She read it twice." "Nikolai," she said. "I read it," he said. His voice was the flat calm of a man who is very far from calm. "Sofia, the account in Zurich," she said. "My grandfather's." "We'll deal with, it's a claim, isn't it?" She held the monitor with both hands. "It's a financial claim, something from the 1990s structures. My grandfather was part of some joint venture, and the account was never closed, and Merck is the heir to whatever the original party was, and he believes She stopped. "He believes I am the heir to the other side of it." Silence confirmed it. "Much," she said. "Sofia." "How much, Nikolai?" A very long pause. "Approximately 40 million, he said. The room was very quiet. "American dollars," she said. "Yes." She sat with this. She had grown up in a house where $4 million had been a catastrophic, life-ending amount. She sat in a secure room in the house of a man who ran a criminal empire and had been watching her for 4 years. And she processed the information that she was, apparently, the heir to $40 million of dormant criminal money in a Swiss account that she had never known existed. And that Vadim Merck wanted it. And that obtaining her, leveraging her, compelling her, one way or another, was the mechanism by which he intended to access it. "Didn't want to destroy the consolidation," she said slowly. "He wanted the consolidation was leverage, everything was leverage. He wanted to create pressure to get to me. He wants the account," Nikolai said. "He needs my signature," she said. "Or my presence, or both, something that requires the living heir to the Marchetti side of the original structure." She breathed. "And he thought destroying the consolidation would force your hand, force you to hand me over to end the conflict." "Doesn't understand," she said quietly, "that you won't do that." Nikolai said. "He doesn't," which means he'll escalate. She looked at the message on the monitor. At her mother's name, Ne Marchetti, used by a man who wanted to reduce her to a signature on a document, she thought about her mother humming in the kitchen. She thought about $40 million that had been sitting in a Swiss account for 30 years while her father lost everything he touched, and she sold her mother's jewelry to keep the lights on. "Nikolai," she said. "I'm here. Come back to the house." "I'm all ready." "Now," she said. "I need you in this house." A pause, then 10 minutes. She put down the channel handset and sat in the secure room with the monitor showing Merck's message, and the cold of the thing she was feeling and the specific anger. Not the hot kind, the cold, precise kind, the kind she was learning from him, of a woman who has just discovered that her entire history has been a map someone else was reading. 10 minutes. She would have 10 minutes to process before he arrived. She used them. And when the door opened and he came through it, dark coat, gray eyes, the sharp face in the harsh light of the secure room, she stood and looked at him and said, "Tell me everything about my mother's family." He looked at her for one moment. Then he crossed the room to where she was standing and did not speak and did not manage the expression on his face. He simply held her. And in the particular stillness of that, in the fire of it and the complexity of it, and the specific feeling of being held by a man who had watched her for 4 years and knew her better than anyone alive, and was also, somehow in the middle of all of this, she finally, fully understood. She was not here because she had no choice. She was here because this was exactly, precisely, catastrophically, the right place. Chapter 14. What Nikolai did not say why there was something he hadn't told her. She knew it the way she knew all things that existed at the edges of what he chose to reveal, by the specific texture of the silence around it. He had told her about her grandfather's account. He had told her about the Marchetti connection to the 1990s structures. He had told her, in the careful inventory of a man disclosing information he'd been holding, what Merck wanted and why and how the account functioned. He had not told her how long he'd known. Not about the account specifically. He might genuinely not have known about the Zurich account. She was provisionally inclined to believe that particular claim, but about the family connection, about her grandfather's history, about the specific relevance of the Marchetti name to the world she'd been placed into. Asked him on the morning of the day after, at breakfast with the particular precision she used when she needed an honest answer. Long did you know about my grandfather's history? A pause that lasted 1 second too long. Before or after the debt situation, she said. He set down his coffee cup. Initial investigation in 2020, he said carefully. Your grandfather's name appeared in records I had reason to access. The connection was, he paused, indirect, not obviously relevant. Obviously relevant, she repeated, but you noted it. And when you purchased my father's debt, the decision to purchase the debt was not connected to Nikolai. Her voice was very quiet. The quiet that he had learned she knew meant she was at the edge of something. He looked at her, the gray eyes steady. I cannot tell you that the information played no role in my calculation, he said. I can tell you that it was not the primary driver. What was the primary driver? He held her gaze. You already know the answer to that. She did. She did know. And the knowing was both a clarification and a complication, because it meant that the two things, his obsession with her as a person and his awareness of her as a woman with a complicated inheritance, had existed simultaneously in his calculations for 4 years, and she had only been told about one of them. You should have told me, she said. Yes. You chose not to. I chose. I did not know what the Marchetti connection meant. I still don't know fully. I didn't. He stopped, started again. I did not want to introduce something that I could not fully explain, and that would. I did not want you to believe that it influenced that you watched me for 4 years because of the money. She looked at him for a long moment. At the man who had watched her for 4 years and kissed her in the firelight and held her in the secure room and was now sitting across a breakfast table trying to explain the gap between what he'd done and what he'd meant. It, she asked. Influence it, he said, flat, certain, the way he said true things. Then you should have trusted me to believe that. He held her gaze. Instead, she said, you managed my information again, the way you said you wouldn't. She kept her voice level. That is the thing I need you to understand is not acceptable, Nikolai. Not the surveillance, not the obsession, not the forced circumstances. Those are, she paused. Those are things I have absorbed and contextualized and chosen in spite of. But managing what I know, deciding for me what I can handle, she met his eyes. That is the thing that actually damages trust, not the truth, the chosen absence of it. Silence was the kind that mattered. Yes, he said, one word, complete. If there are other things in that category, there are no other things, he said. I have gone through everything. There are no other things I have held in that category. A pause. I am telling you now, she breathed. All right. Sofia, all right, she said again. Not forgiving, precisely, it wasn't about forgiving. It was about the recalibration that was required when a person you had chosen to trust did the specific thing you'd asked them not to do and owned it immediately and completely. We're fine. I'm telling you the rule clearly so you know it, that's all. He held her gaze for a moment. The rule. Manage my information, tell me the true thing, even when you think the context is complicated. She held his eyes. I will always choose the complicated true thing over the simplified safe one, every time. I know that now, he said. Know it going forward, she said. She picked up her coffee. Now, tell me how we recover the Petrov relationship in 12 days. He looked at her. Something in his face was doing something she had not seen before. Not the almost smile, not the cataloging expression, not the full unmanaged look she had come to know as hers specifically. Something that was simply gratitude. Quiet and deep and without performance. She saw it and did not comment on it. There was work to do. Chapter 15. What came in the night she heard it at 3 a.m, not in the house, outside. A sound so brief and specific that she would have placed it under the category of dream noise, except that her nervous system responded before her conscious mind did, sitting her upright in the dark with her heart already moving faster than sleep allowed. A gunshot. Single. From the direction of the south perimeter. She was at the door in the time it took to pull on the robe from the chair. She opened it. The corridor was already in motion, 2 of Andrei's men moving fast toward the staircase, communication devices active. She caught Mikkel by the arm as he passed. "What happened?" "Perimeter breach," he said. "South edge. Ms. Volkov, please return." "Is Nikolai at the south?" Mikkel's expression told her before the pause did. She released his arm and went downstairs. Andrei was in the entry hall running a coordinated response with the efficiency of a man doing what he had trained for. He saw her and started to speak. "Where is Nikolai?" she said. "He is handling." "Where?" A pause. "South edge. He went down when the alert came. Ms. Volkov, the house is secure, you should." She was already at the rear door. The south perimeter was 300 meters from the house through the frozen garden. She could see the flashlights of Andrei's team moving through the trees. She could see, and this was the thing that made her stop breathing correctly for 2 steps before she corrected it. A figure on the ground, and 2 men crouching over it, and a third standing back with a weapon raised toward the tree line, scanning. She crossed the garden at a pace that was not running and was close to running. Nikolai was one of the crouching men. He was alive and upright, and directing the 2 men beside him with the contained urgency of someone in operational mode. He looked up when he heard her footsteps, and the expression that crossed his face in that half-second before control re-established itself was the one she was keeping. "Fine," he said. "I know," she said. She looked at the figure on the ground. One of Merck's people, she could tell by the coat, by the equipment. Alive from the sound of his breathing, though not operating efficiently. "What did he come for?" "He was alone," Nikolai said. Standing now, the operational crisis resolved at some point before she arrived. He moved to her. He put one hand on her arm briefly, checking, the gesture of a man confirming something with a touch. He was not a combatant, he was a courier. He held out what he was holding in his other hand, a sealed envelope. She looked at it. "That's addressed to me." She took it, opened it inside, a single photograph and a key. The photograph was of a building, an address written on the back, Zurich. The key was small and old and had a bank logo on it that she recognized from the research she'd been quietly doing for 5 days. She looked up at Nikolai. "He's giving it to me," she said. This is not a threat. He's sending me the key." Nikolai looked at the photograph and the key in her hand. "He's opening a different negotiation," he said slowly. "He's changing tactics." She stared at the key. "He's been trying to get to the account through pressure. Through the consolidation, through the surveillance breach, through all of it. It hasn't worked." She looked up. "So now he's trying to give it to me directly and make me come to him for the explanation." "It's a trap," Nikolai said. "Yes," she said. "Obviously." She held his gaze. "And also, it's a real key." The winter night was very still around them. "Know what you're thinking," he said. "Good," she said. "Because I'm thinking it clearly, and I'd like you to tell me whether you think I'm wrong." "Not wrong," he said. "Then we go to Zurich." Silence was the kind that held the full weight of what was being agreed to. "We go to Zurich," he said. She looked at the key in her hand. At the building in the photograph. At the address written on the back in ink so deliberate it looked like a summons. She thought about her mother humming in the kitchen. She thought about the woman who had come from Genoa at 24 and married Pyotr Volkov and raised a daughter who could not be managed and died when that daughter was 12 in a car accident on a clear night with no ice on the roads. She thought about no ice on the roads. She turned to look at Nikolai. "My mother's accident," she said. "There was no ice." He met her eyes. In the cold of the south perimeter, with his team around them and the figure on the ground and the winter forest at their backs, she watched the expression on his face arrive at the understanding before she finished saying it. "Nikolai," she said very quietly. "Was my mother's accident an accident?" He held her gaze and said nothing. The silence lasted 4 seconds. 4 seconds during which she watched his face cycle through every expression she had catalogued over the past 3 weeks, and arrive, finally, at the one she had not seen before. Not grief, not the almost warmth, not the controlled architectural expression of a man who managed everything. Dread, he was dreading telling her, which meant he knew, which meant, "How long?" she said. Her voice was perfectly level. The way it got when something had gone deeply wrong, when the cold had come and the heat of emotion was not the tool she had available. "How long have you known about my mother?" He was looking at her with the full, unmanaged, devastating expression of a man who had built a 4-year obsession around a woman whose history he had partially, carefully, strategically not told her. Not because of money, not because of the account, because of this. "Nikolai." "Your mother," he said very quietly, "did not die in an accident." The winter was silent around them. The frost was in the air and the security team was nearby and somewhere in the house.